organised
your
repatriation.
State, though. I mean, Dan Andrews refused to take any Australians being repatriated for some time because of an outbreak in Melbourne. Was that racist?
That's because there was quarantine facilities available in other places. Now, what the Commonwealth is saying is at the moment there's none. Now, that is, frankly, a damning admission by Scott Morrison that he has failed to prepare for an eventuality like this.
Well, but Adam
now,
Bandt, can we just stick on the racism
there have been
claim?
Arrangements in place for other people to quarantine.
Can we just stick on the racism claim? Because it's a really heavy charge to lay against the Prime Minister and indeed a government. I mean, they're refusing to prioritise cricketers. Is that racist?
No, I'm making the point that the jail time is being levied against people, citizens, people who have a connection with Australia for the first time in a way that we didn't do against countries that were predominantly white. And now, maybe the government says, well, we're doing that because we don't have quarantine facilities ready, but that's not an excuse.
Okay,
that is
so
no
is
excuse.
it racist
The quarantine
or
facilities
is it because
should be
there's no
ready at this
quarantine
point.
facilities, though?
Well, as I've said, I stand by the words. I think that it speaks volumes that the first time that the government is taking a move of threatening people with jail time is against a country in a way that we didn't do when we were dealing with countries that were predominantly white. And whatever justification the government has for it, if the government says, oh no, we're not doing it for that reason, we're doing it for other reasons, then you've got to question those other reasons as well. Because at the moment, the government is saying we're doing it because we don't have enough quarantine facilities ready and we don't have the repatriation flights organised. That is a damning indictment on Scott Morrison.
Well, they're actually saying it's because India has almost 400,000 new cases of COVID every day. Do you not buy that?
Well, clearly there is an outbreak and clearly it is reaching catastrophic stages, and there's things that the government could be doing to help that. Of course, the facts are the facts in India, and it is a terrible situation. But one of the things that the Indian government is calling for is for the ability to roll out vaccines much more quickly by having intellectual property restrictions on vaccines waived. Now, they've gone to the WTO to ask for that. Australia is blocking them, okay? Australia at the moment is joining with other countries in blocking the push from India to have vaccines more available. And meanwhile, Pfizer, who is making, of course, one of the vaccines, has just announced proudly that it's made $26 billion out of dealing with the pandemic. Now, Australia could be doing things and could have done things to help get the situation in India under control, and it's failed to do that. So yes, we should be providing more immediate assistance because oxygenators and the like, you're seeing the real shortages of the system there. But there are other things Australia could be doing. But in fact, Australia has done things that has contributed to a lack of availability of vaccines.
So the 9,000 Australians that are in India, are none of them white-skinned?
Sorry, say that again?
Of the 9,000 Australians stuck in India, I'm just going back to your racism claim, are none of them white-skinned?
I don't know the details of all of those 9,000 people who are stuck. My point is that we are dealing with India in a way that we did not deal with other countries. And when you look at the government's justifications for that, none of them stack up.
Did you think that shutting the border to China was racist too?
No, supported the move, but that didn't come with saying that Australians or people with a connection with Australia who want to return home are going to be threatened with jail time. And that is the point. This is the first time that this has happened. Why is this happening? I've made the point and I stand by my comments there. Why is this happening? This isn't something that we did when other countries faced outbreak. We should have a health-led response to the pandemic, not a force-led response. We're very concerned that if it gets to the point where having Australian citizenship means nothing and doesn't entitle you to protection, then that is a line that the government is crossing this time in a way that it has not crossed before, and that is of grave concern.
Well, it is health-led. I mean, some could argue that the government hides behind health advice a little bit too often. And yes, I agree with you that the health officer, the CMO, does not set penalties here, but Paul Kelly's signature is on that section.
Yeah, but have a read of that letter, Laura. The health advice for months now has been to build suitable quarantine facilities in Australia to deal with potential surges, knowing that there could be outbreaks in other parts of the world. We have known this for a very long time. And what has the government done? It has sat on its hands and it has tried to point the blame at the states when it is responsible fundamentally for quarantine. And if the government says, oh, the states have agreed to it, well, does Scott Morrison chair this national cabinet or not? He was so proud at the National Cabinet when he set up. He said we're moving on to a war footing to deal with the pandemic. Well, what kind of war footing is it when you don't prepare for an outbreak that is eminently foreseeable and that the medical experts have been urging you to prepare for months?
Well, unfortunately, he's not a dictator and can't dictate to the states. That has been abundantly clear. Do you think there's a problem with our federation here, Adam Bandt? Would you support changing it?
Well, the federal government has ultimately got responsibility for quarantine. And so if it decides to contract it out to the private sector or to the states,
but which state
then that's the federal government's responsibility.
Which state does this federal quarantine facility get set up in? Do the premiers not have to agree, or can they just override the states?
Well, we've been proposing in the letter to the government, the crossbenchers have said, let's look at Howard Springs and expanding the existing facility that is at Howard Springs. You've got the Victorian government that says that it is willing to establish a state. Yes, but the point is it's ultimately the Prime Minister's responsibility. It's ultimately the Prime Minister's responsibility to do this. And if he decides that he wants to subcontract it out...
Wouldn't you, Adam Bandt? I mean, they still need to give access to the federal government to do these things. It needs to be collaborative.
Sure, and we've got states in Victoria saying that they're looking at going it alone and doing their own, and you've got the Northern Territory that's got a facility, and that facility was meant to be able to deal with exigencies like this, and whose responsibility is that it's not? It's ultimately the Prime Minister's.